Hello, everyone, and welcome to Slash Film Daily for Wednesday, June 30th, 2021. On today's episode, we're going to have a spoiler-filled discussion about Loki, Episode 4, The Nexus Event. This is Slash Film editorial director Peter Sciretta. And joining me, as always, is Slash Film weekend editor Brad Oman.
Hey, that's me.
Brad, it's almost July.
I know.
Isn't that crazy?
It is crazy.
It's like time is now fast forwarding after it had been in slow motion for so long.
Yeah.
Okay, let's talk about this week's episode of Loki. As always, we break this down to 4 sections: feedback, where we answer your questions and bring up stuff that came up since our last recording. Then we go into our brief reactions, and then we go into the beat by beat breakdown and into the speculation. But before all that, I want to tell people that if you have not seen the mid-credits scene in this episode, you should probably pause the show, go watch it, because it's very important, and we're going to talk about it, and you don't want to hear about it, you want to see it. So there you go. Okay, so let's get into the feedback section. As always, you can send us your questions, theories, comments, concern to peter@slashfilm.com. Leave your name and general geographic location in case we mention email on the air. I can't promise you that we'll mention all the emails, but anything that's relevant, it hasn't been disproven by the next week's episode, we'll probably bring up. Okay, so in feedback, there was this article over at Heroic Hollywood, which I think was spurred by a post on Reddit that I just wanted to bring up. This is kind of a cool little Easter egg. They noticed that the Battle of New York from the Avengers actually took place on May 4th, 2012, which is the day that movie got released domestically. So that information was revealed in the Tempad, which is highlighted Loki's location as the date he was there. So I guess Avengers took place in real time with the movies release. Is that a cool detail?
It's a fun little Easter egg to have the events of the battle happening on the day it hit theaters. Yeah.
I think for the most part, a lot of the films I think Kevin Feige at one point was like, these films take place in real time. So usually, the time that has gone by since the last film is the time that's gone by in the MCU. Now that has kind of been thrown out a little bit, because now we have prequels like Captain Marvel and Black Widow, and
plus Avengers Endgame jumped ahead 5 years.
And then that's so it's a little bit more complicated today. But I think we might have even reported on this at one point, but they actually at Marvel Studios have Brad, you might remember what they call it. Do they call it the scroll? They have something that like maps out everything that's happened and when it's happened. It's like, I forget what it was called.
Yeah, I don't remember either.
It's kind of like how over at Lucasfilm they have the Holocron, which is like this database of everything that's happened canon-wise and non-canon-wise in Star Wars universe. So they keep track of all that, even though they seem to mess up that Spider-Man thing, right? So
yeah.
Okay. Bartley S. wrote to us on Twitter. He says, "Love listening to the podcast. You seem to be a bit confused with what's going on with the Loki in the timeline. When Loki picked up the Tesseract, which he wasn't supposed to do, he created a branch in the timeline that became a variant branch. So when the TVA came to take him and prune the timeline branch, they weren't taking him from the main timeline. They were taking him from the branch, which means that the Loki that we've seen in the movies, in the MCU timeline, was never taken. He's still there in, do we want to call it Earth 616, I guess? So there is no plot hole. What do you think of this, Brad?
It makes sense to a point, but at the same time, I feel like that I guess if that's where it branches off, then the normal timeline continues as it were, and they don't have to put a reset charge there like they do in the variant branches. So, yeah, I think that works.
It makes sense, but I wish they would explain that, because they really are very vague on how that whole thing works. Like, because, in past podcasts, I've theorized, like, what happens to Loki because they've taken Loki. Now Loki's out of the timeline. So everything that was supposed to happen with Loki is now not going to happen, which is going to cause a different chain of events. But
I think that's where the explanation of the branches comes into play, because it's the whole Back to the Future thing of where a new timeline starts as soon as Loki left the timeline, but that original timeline still exists as if he didn't, because the branch is where things are different. So Loki never actually leaves that timeline because it didn't happen.
Yeah, I think what's confusing about it is almost every single piece of time travel stories, from movies to books, have not treated time travel in this way.
Yeah, which is exactly why Avengers Endgame had to do that whole explanation.
Yeah. But I like it. I like this explanation, and I think I'm going to go with it. I just wish they could have shown it in some way, maybe with like that missed minutes animation or something, because
I think after you think about it, like, it makes sense when you think about the branches and stuff like that. But yeah, it maybe could have used a little bit of extra exposition.
Yeah. I was listening to David Chen has this he does a weekly video with Dan, I'm gonna mispronounce his last name, Grovstan, I think it is, and I was listening to that while I was going to sleep, and during that, Dan theorized that Loki wasn't really drunk in that scene on the train, that he was, when he was singing in Asgardian, he was doing it as a way of testing Sylvie to see if she was actually who she was claiming to be, and claiming to be from Asgard. So I wanted to run that theory by you, Brad, because I thought that was an interesting theory that didn't even occur to me.
Yeah, but like, I don't think that he necessarily needed her to prove who she was, because I mean, the fact that she can use magic and enchant people kind of makes it seem like that's the case. So granted, Sylvie is a character who was given magical powers by Loki and wasn't actually Asgardian, so that is a possibility, but now knowing what we know, I think that that's clear that that's not the case.
Yeah, I think it's clear too, but I do like the theory that maybe he was testing out, like, is she actually Asgardian? Is she who she seems to be?
Right.
But okay. Someone else, I forget where I got this, so I apologize. I did not write down the name, but someone else had this theory about that Franklin D. Roosevelt High School pen that was in Ravonna Renslayer's office, that it belonged to Mobius in his previous life. And maybe, oh wait, this was from you.
Yeah, I saw it pop up somewhere, and I don't remember where I saw it either, but I read it, and then I thought about it later. I was like, oh yeah, I should mention this. But yeah, it's now that we know that all of the TVA employees are variants, it would be an interesting detail, especially if Renslayer is in on it, if she has that pen from the time that she turned him into a variant, and it's something from his timeline when he used to live.
The only thing is, I feel like they made so much of a deal about the pen that, like, I don't know how you pay that off, especially now that Mobius is, apparently dead. Or is he? I guess we'll talk about that later. Okay. We have one last one. This came from email. This came from Darius in Northern California. He writes in, or they write in, I love the work you do every week. I look forward to this podcast every week more than any other. We briefly touched on Sylvie's mother in episode 3. However, now I'm wondering about her siblings, specifically Thor. Does the existence of a Lady Loki open the door for a female Thor making an appearance in the show? What are your thoughts?
Sure. I don't think we'll see it happen necessarily. It does open the possibility that maybe Thor is also a woman in that version of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, as it were. But there's a variety of different Lokis and Thors out there, probably, and if it is a female Thor, it's not the female Thor that we know, since that's Jane Foster. But so it would be like a different version. But yeah, I mean, that would be cool to see. But I think it's probably too much of a distraction for the story they're trying to tell.
Yeah, they could have shown that in that flashback sequence at the beginning of this episode. It could have been, young female Thor. But tell me this, Brad. I was under the impression that the variant is the one different thing in this brand, starting when the branch starts off the thing. So I would think that there wouldn't be a female Thor.
Well, so the thing is as we see at the beginning of this episode, Sylvie isn't doing anything that seemed to create a branch.
Yeah.
So I don't know if it's the mere existence of her or however that is possible.
What I'm saying is her mere existence, like would multiple, I feel like it would only be the one thing. Do you know what I mean? The one person or the one event or the one variant. I don't think it would be multiple different things.
Well, I think that you have to anticipate that if one thing is different, then that probably changes a lot of things in the timeline, you know? So like, cause I bet the universe isn't exactly the same, you know, in a universe where a different Loki exists because that Loki is different. So like you wouldn't necessarily have Chris Hemsworth's Thor, you know, alongside you know, a grown Sylvie in that universe necessarily. So I think that it leaves the room open for there to be a lot of things different in each different branch and timeline.
By the way, I love that we discuss stuff like this that definitely does not matter, is never going to come into play probably in this show. It's just, I don't know. It's the nerdy stuff that I dig. Anyways, okay, let's move on to brief thoughts. Brad, what did you think of this week's episode?
Man, this episode threw me for a loop. There was a lot of things that happened that I was not expecting, and I loved every minute of it. It was very cool to see this show go in directions that where we partially predicted some things, but didn't know how they would unfold and how the story would continue and bring them into the equation. And yeah, it's just, you know, I feel like Owen Wilson was really on fire this episode. We really got to see Gugu Mbatha-Raw open up as Renslayer and show a different side. The you know, from the Timekeepers to the last 10 minutes of, you know, the series or this episode in general, there was just a lot of cool things to take in. And this is becoming more and more one of my favorite things that Marvel has ever done.
Yeah, I love this show so much. I will say that last week ended with things getting like really huge in scale, and I thought that this week would kind of continue that. But it's kind of funny that they kind of returned back to conversations in small rooms across tables, which is not a bad thing, but it's just not exactly what I expected. But I guess what you're saying, I agree with it completely what you're saying. We've been kind of trying to outguess this show from the beginning, and I'm so glad that this show is going in directions and doing things that I could have never anticipated. There's just like a few things that happened in this episode that were like WTF moment, like, oh my God, this is happening. Like just big, huge swings that I don't think I could have possibly predicted. So, yeah, and the way the episode ends is pretty bonkers, and that mid-credit scene is pretty bonkers, but we'll get to that. Okay, let's jump into the breakdown. This episode is titled The Nexus Event, which I like because I like when something has dual meanings, Brad, and that Nexus Event could mean that event that takes place on Lamentis 1 between Loki and Sylvie, or it could mean the event that this episode opens up with Sylvie. Some kind of event happened, which is kind of the subject of like, you know, what was that event? Was it really worth, you know, erasing Sylvie for? So like it's multiple layers to it, which I like. So we begin with that flashback to Sylvie as a child on Asgard being arrested by the TVA for being a variant. I want to make note that she's playing with these little toys, and she has a toy of Valkyrie defeating a dragon, which looks like the dragon from Thor Ragnarok, to save Asgard. And she also has like this giant wolf toy next to the boat, which is probably Fenris. So a lot of fun, like little Easter eggs there. And speaking of Easter eggs, you have the Minuteman agent is actually Ravonna Renslayer before she became a judge, and her identification is Hunter A23. Brad, can you guess why her identification is Hunter A23.
I think we actually talked about this in a previous episode.
Oh, did we?
Yeah, because we noticed it when her you see her helmet sitting among her trophies. And,
you did mention that.
Yeah, and it's because in case you missed it for whatever reason, it's because Ravonna Renslayer first appeared in Avengers issue number 23.
Yeah. I completely forgot that you brought that up, but it's because I was totally in her office. Okay, here's my question. It's not clear how Sylvie is a variant, right? Like later in the episode, I think Sylvie expresses that she's a variant because of her mere existence, right? But it's never really spoken out loud, and she even asks the question later on, and it's not answered.
Yeah, and I think that's probably the point. I have a feeling that this is going to be one of the things that keys everybody into the idea that the TVA isn't necessarily stopping things that are keeping the sacred timeline intact, but they're stopping things that will keep the timeline from falling out of the control of the Timekeepers or whoever else is in control of the timeline, as it were. And so I think that it was probably some anticipatory pre-strike, maybe knowing what Sylvie was going to do, and so they were trying to stop it ahead of time by bringing her in and erasing that timeline.
But the whole I guess now that we're talking about reasonings and stuff like that, the whole reasoning that the TVA or what the TVA agents are told are that they can't stop something before it happens. They can only stop the branch after it happens. So you would think that the Renslayer at that point was probably a legit TVA Minuteman agent and wasn't in on things and in on this being a scam and was probably told what went wrong to cause this variant, right?
I mean, maybe, unless she was already in on it, and maybe that's her first time doing something, to start carrying out more nefarious deeds.
Yeah. Okay, so the scene ends with Renslayer opening her eyes while she waits for the elevator doors to open. I love how I love when you do flashbacks in movies or TV shows, and it's not just for the. I mean, obviously this flashback is for the benefit of us as the viewers, but it's also one of the characters on screen experiencing that. So she's obviously thinking back to that moment.
Yeah.
Yeah. One thing I've never noticed before is this door, this elevator door that takes you to the Timekeepers, has a bunch of triangle shapes on it, and the triangles kind of come together to be hourglasses.
Yeah. And they're also, but the way they're designed, they also look like triangular infinity symbols.
Yeah, that too. So Renslayer nervously steps into the Timekeeper's lair. Okay, I might be reading too much into this, Brad, but we do find out later in this episode that Renslayer's in on this, right?
Mm-hmm.
That she knows that she at least knows that they're all variants. That's the one thing we know for sure.
Yes.
And they know that they killed is that B20 or C20?
C20, yeah.
But she walks nervously into the Timekeeper's lair, and they seem to be like they're there. I almost get the impression that she doesn't know that the Timekeepers aren't real.
Yeah, I agree. I think that she thinks the Timekeepers are real. Or at the very least, she's putting on a very convincing face. But at the same time, why would she have to do that when she's by herself,
Yeah. I mean, she could be scared to meet someone else that's in that room. It doesn't have to be Timekeepers, but...
Yeah, perhaps, a man behind the curtain situation, where she converses with him in that room instead of, anywhere else where they're bound to be seen. Yeah.
Okay, so Ravonna tells Mobius that the Timekeepers blame her for Sylvie getting so close to them and getting away. Do you actually think this is the case, or do you think this is something that Ravonna is telling Mobius to motivate him in the way that she needs to motivate him?
Maybe a little of both, because I'm sure if it's not actually the Timekeepers, that are there and just have some kind of a proxy, then whoever is probably is concerned about that.
Yeah. I mean, whoever's there is probably upset that she broke in and got so close. So I guess it doesn't really matter who it is. But yeah, the next minute she clearly lies to him about Hunter C20, claiming her mind was scrambled so much by Sylvie that she is now dead. I mean, I guess she's not lying. She is dead. We find out later that she is on the temp pad. It says deceased.
Yeah, but yeah, obviously not quite as bad not in quite as bad a shape as she made it seem.
Yeah. Okay, so we cut back to Lamentus 1. Meteorites are falling to the moon as Sylvie tells Loki her backstory. She explains that, quote, the universe wants to break free, so it manifests chaos. She ran from the TVA until she realized she could live in the shadows of apocalypses, and that's where she grew up. Quote, the ends of 1,000 worlds, which is, I think it's such an interesting, tragic backstory for her character. To like they grew up like just living in these apocalypses.
Yeah, you're only living where people are about to die. It has to be super depressing.
Yeah, I almost want to see that show, or maybe I don't. But okay, so back at the TVA, they aren't even able to detect the smallest Nexus event going on because they're hiding in this like apocalyptic scenario. Not even a leaf being stepped on, that's said, which I think is interesting because I don't think it's been established how much of an event a Nexus event has to be to actually cause like a big enough branch that it's a problem. And it's cool that they can kind of like zoom in on the macro level of like even like, you know, a leaf being crushed that wouldn't like have like huge butterfly effect kind of effects on the world.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I love all this world building. I know some people just don't care, but back in Lamentus, Sylvie wonders if being a Loki means to be a loser. And Loki argues that to be a Loki means to be a survivor. Loki says that she's amazing and she's touching his arm. And just then the TVA sees this big Nexus event and is able to apprehend them seconds before the destruction of the moon. Brad, I gotta ask you, what do you think caused this Nexus event?
I mean,
is it love? Is it just love? Is that what it is?
I think that's what it's supposed to be. Is that it's? I mean, presumably, you know, Loki having these feelings for the first time is a big thing because it's maybe changing who he is and what he's capable of feeling. So I think so because I mean, Mobius lays it out saying that it's just pure chaos that's between them, but I think that it's clear, especially at the very end of this episode, that it's love manifesting itself through Loki.
The weird thing here, I think the showrunner said somewhere that there's not going to be a relationship, a romantic relationship between Loki and Sylvie.
Well, just because there won't be doesn't mean that
there isn't.
That there isn't a lead up to it, because them saying that could then easily be saying that it doesn't actually come together, even though, you know, there's the possibility of it happening.
Yeah, I was thinking like maybe if you want to skirt that even more, maybe it's the finding oneself in another person, kind of like that connection of, you know, I mean, they say in this episode a couple times, I think, of how he's alone.
Yeah,
in this universe,
well, and I also think that this love doesn't necessarily have to be romantic either. You know, like I think it could be like not even about loving himself, but just recognizing what he sees in Sylvie, he starts to see in himself. And so in a way, I guess you could say it's like about him loving himself, but I think it's just about recognizing somebody else's pain and seeing the similarities between her and him.
Yeah. Mobius comments on how unusual and how big that branch that's caused by this Nexus event is, which I don't know. I feel a little silly diving into this, Brad, because I think it clearly is kind of like some kind of love or connection, but it almost feels like the show wants us to ask like what happened there, because like the whole episode is the TVA like, you know, interrogating them, trying to find out what happened.
Yeah, for sure.
But yeah, so I don't know, like, is it silly or is it just purely answered in the way that we we assume here.
Yeah, I mean, I think that they'll probably have to explain it more clearly in the remaining 2 episodes. But yeah, I'm pretty sure that's the implication.
I just don't know how, like, finding love or finding a connection with someone in a place that they cannot escape from. So they're in this apocalyptic event, how that creates a branching timeline where we've already seen that there's no possible way to branch a timeline. Do you know what I mean? I don't know. Okay, maybe I'm reading too much into this. We'll come back to that probably in the next 2 episodes, I'm assuming. But Mobius and Loki argue as if they argue for a bit, and then Loki gets put into this bad memory prison. But before he can he tells Mobius that the TVA are lying to him. So he's in this mind prison. Loki is back on Asgard and is confronted by an angry Sif, and it happens over and over again on a loop. I wanted to hear your thoughts on this whole sequence.
Well, it's funny, obviously, to begin with. Very surprising to see Jamie Alexander back as Lady Sif, and it's cool.
And by the way, it's her first MCU appearance since Thor: Dark World, unless you count that time that she was on Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., but Marvel pretends that show doesn't exist, so I think we should also pretend.
Yeah, so she's seeing her back was cool, and interestingly enough, too, the idea of Loki cutting her hair just to mess around with her is something that's actually found in Norse mythology. There's this 13th century tale where Loki wanted to mess with Thor by cutting Sif's hair, and because in mythology Sif is actually blonde, and she has this very long, luscious, flowing hair that Thor views as this like beautiful thing that's almost like a treasure to him. And so to mess with Thor, Loki cuts all of her hair off. So that's kind of a fun thing to insert actual mythology into the Marvel Cinematic Universe. But it's cool. It's just what I liked is seeing another tool that the TVA has at their disposal to deal with variants and things like that. And it kind of shows just, I guess, how cruel they can be too to prisoners and things like that. So just to mess with them and break them down, to figure out what's going on. So I liked how the sequence, evolved and turned from something of him being exasperated to kind of collapsing on himself. And it was a great sequence.
Yeah. And I love that, like you say, the TVA, they're so obsessed with time, and that all their weapons deal with time in some way. And their version of a prison cell or a torture cell is basically this time loop where Loki has to relive this particular moment over and over again. And it seems like they knew what moment it was going to be, because when he came out, Mobius mentioned Sif. So do you think they were trying to do anything in particular with that, or they were just like, find a moment in his life where he was like kicked in the balls and make him relive that?
Yeah, I think that's definitely what it was.
Yeah. Okay. Mobius meets with Renslayer and tries unsuccessfully to convince her to let him interrogate Sylvie. He's told to break Loki and find out what caused this Nexus event. So on his way back to Loki, he sees B-20 and other Minutemen.
Hold on a second.
Oh, did I miss something?
Yeah. So during that scene where they're talking in Ravana's office,
yeah,
when he signs the paperwork to close the case, there's a very brief moment where Mobius again looks at the pen and takes a moment to register it. So it's definitely important.
Some people think we're making too big of a deal of this pen, Brad.
Yeah, I put in our Easter eggs post for this episode, I put a screenshot of the exact moment, and it's very intentional. Where he after he signs, he looks again, almost as like a, thinking back, like, man, this pen.
I will bet money this pen comes back in some way. I'm just saying. Okay, so on his way back to Loki, he sees B-20 and other Minutemen. They're guarding Sylvie's time theater. And Mobius says that, there's a fun moment where he's talking to them and he's like, we've brought in Kree, Titans, vampires, which I think is kind of funny because they're obviously, Titans is the race that Thanos was from, and vampires. This is the first time, I guess, in the MCU they're making vampires canon, and it teases the upcoming Blade movie that's eventually going to happen. Do we have a date on that?
No, they haven't dated that or anything. It also could be possible that I doubt this, but since we have a Morbius movie coming up, it could be a reference to that as well.
Sure, Brad, sure. So B20 asks what Loki said, and Mobius tells her that he said the TVA are lying. Something seems to register with her, which we'll come to later. Loki is still in the time cell, having a self-aware epiphany about himself, and Sif reacts by telling him he's alone, and he's always going to be alone. So so Mobius and Loki sit down in the time theater, and Mobius lies and says that Sylvie was pruned and discovers Loki's emotional connection to her. Mobius calls it a sick, twisted romantic relationship, which I have to bring this up, Brad. There are two versions of one person, right? So if they did end up getting together, is that incest?
I mean, it's either incest or it's masturbation.
Yeah. Fair enough. Okay. But I guess they probably don't want us to think too much about it, but they do bring it up. Mobius says that it's our chaos that could break Mobius says that the chaos of like two of the same person falling in love could break reality. So his theory is that's what's caused the Nexus event. Do you buy that?
There's probably more to it than that. It's an interesting idea, but I feel like there has to be more to it than that.
Yeah, I think so too. Mobius reveals that he's still. Oh wait, sorry. I'm misreading my notes here. Mobius reveals that Sylvie's still alive, and Loki explains to Mobius that all the TVA members are variants, kidnapped from the timeline, and mind wiped. Mobius doesn't believe him at first, or maybe he does, but convinces himself not to. B15 is distressed. She looks at this poster with a mustache man. It says, "Did you get them all? ? Verify through deletion." So she meets with Sylvie, opening a time door, taking Sylvie with her, and they meet outside Rock's cart, that apocalypse that we saw in the second episode. And Sylvie tells her the truth about the Timekeepers. She shows her a look back at her past, and it is enough to convince her. She says, "I was happy." So in Renslayer's office, we see the tape-to-tape system playing like a music of a theremin. And here's the moment in this podcast where it's Pete was wrong. In a previous episode, I said I theorized that the tape-to-tape system was being used to record Renslayer and Mobius's conversation, but apparently it's just there to play background music. So I was wrong. Ravonna asked Mobius if he could go anywhere. Where would he go? He says he likes being here now doing the work. Mobius asked why he wasn't allowed to interrogate Sylvie, and Ravonna says that she didn't want him to see what happened. That she didn't want to see what happened to C20 happen to him. So it's a good deflection there. I almost felt like in this moment that Mobius was buying it before he actually steals the tempad. What were your thoughts like when you're initially watching?
Yeah, I think that he maybe accepted it for a moment, but I think that he's too good at his job to let what Loki said go. Yeah,
and Ravonna says that Mobius, that the Timekeepers want to oversee the variants pruning, and they want him to be there too. And I almost feel like that's the moment where he kind of was like, "Oh, this whole time I've wanted to meet them. I've never met them. They're gonna prune Loki, and they want me there too. Something's up."
Yeah.
Yeah. So he steals the temp pad while Ravonna is putting something on the trophy shelf. Ravonna even gives this nice speech, which that their friendship is uncommon and worth fighting for, which felt kind of weird, but okay, fine. Mobius decides to leave after just one drink, which makes Ravonna very suspicious. And in the library, Mobius takes a look at B20's interrogation video on Renslayer's temp pad. Not only does this confirm what Loki told him, but Ravonna knows and is lying to him. And I just want to say how I love how the video plays in this temp pad. It almost looks like a video on one of those old like CD-ROM or PlayStation games. Like it's like very like, I want to say pixelated, but it's yeah. So again, we are confirming that Ravonna, she knows that, or she seems to. Wait, actually, do we know that she knows that they're all variants? Because she just knows that this person is saying that, and she's going to shut her up and kill her for saying it.
It could go either way. I think it's safe to say that she probably does know everyone is variants, but yeah, it's possible that it could go the other way as well.
Yeah. Mobius tells Loki that he was right and he believes him. There's a sweet moment where Mobius tells Loki that he could be whatever he wants to be, even someone good, in case anyone told him different. There's some great moments here with Owen Wilson. I like. He's doing a great job in the series. I think he deserves a bigger career than he has today. Ravonna is waiting for them and asks for her temp pad back, and Mobius does a good job of pretending like he didn't know, but she's not buying it, and Mobius gives up on the facade and tells her that he would like to go back to whenever he's from before the TVA kidnapped him. Quote, maybe I had a jet ski. Here's the only disappointment, Brad. I feel like this is the payoff to the jet ski thing.
I initially thought so as well and was disappointed, but I think it's possible that we could still get a bigger payoff with it.
Okay. So you still think we're going to see Owen Wilson on a jet ski?
Yeah.
Okay. So a Minuteman agent using his time erasing baton. Do they have a name for that thing?
No, I don't think so. I think it's just been referred to as the TVA baton so far.
And uses it to disintegrate Mobius from this world. So this happens like in a moment. I'm like, wait, what? Did not expect that. Yeah. First of all, I thought like if Mobius died, it would be like an heroic, like the last episode of the season or something like that.
Yeah.
How did you feel?
No, I was totally blown away, and I was like, oh, you got to be kidding me.
Yeah, like what is the rest of the show if you don't have Mobius?
Yeah.
But we'll get to that in the speculation. Ravonna realizes that B-15 has been compromised and calls out to have her like captured. Renslayer takes the two variants by herself into the elevator to see the Timekeepers. Sylvie asks Renslayer if she remembers what her Nexus event was. She smiles like really like sinisterly and says she doesn't remember. Which
and that's what made me think that she was already in on it back then.
Yeah. I mean, we know that she remembered the event of her capture because clearly in that first scene that was her memory of remembering encountering Sylvie. So, but we don't know for sure that she remembers what the Nexus event was. So I don't know. Yeah, it could go either way. But yeah, she does seem very sinister here. And the elevators open up and are presented. The two variants are presented to the Timekeepers, who are on these like floating chairs in front of these neon glowing symbols. And in the big room has like a lot of mist, and there's like, what do you call those? Penrose steps. Are like in the background?
Yeah. It's from MC Escher paintings.
Yeah. You've seen them in like the movie Labyrinth, the movie Inception, I think has the Penrose steps. They go in like every which way. It's kind of cool. But they're hard to, like, you don't really notice them, but they're in the background there.
And it's not just the steps that repeat either, but it looks like the the area where the Timekeepers sit also repeats itself, because you see that red glowing accent in a variety of different shots.
Oh, I didn't even notice that. Okay, so now we actually meet the Timekeepers for the first time, and we saw them, in statue form previously. At the beginning of this episode, we saw them kind of in silhouette, but now we actually see them talking and moving. I gotta admit, when they started talking, Kitra started laughing. Like, it seems it's very weird. Brad, what was your first impression of the Timekeepers?
I was just so caught up in like, wait, what? They're real? Like this? That sucks. And like, but then when you start looking at the details, it's like they are very weird. Like they're very, space lizard-esque. Like they, have been described. So it was very odd, and just the way that they talked and everything, it just felt like a very formal, cosmic weird thing.
Yeah. Loki wondered out loud if they've really brought them there to kill them. The Timekeepers say they are no threat to them, but obviously they are a threat if they're there and they're going to be erased from existence. So Sylvie believes they are scared of them, but the Timekeeper says they are nothing but a cosmic disappointment. B-15 arrives just in time from the elevator, deactivates their time collars for all time, always, she says. We have this big fight sequence where Loki and Sylvie take on the Minutemen guards. Sylvie takes out all of hers and then goes one-on-one with Renslayer. She punches her unconscious just as Loki takes out his Minutemen. And one of the Timekeepers pleads with Sylvie that she's, quote, a child of the Timekeepers too, and that they should talk, to which she slings her sword at the center Timekeeper, decapitating him. There's like sparks flying. The head is revealed to be this huge animatronic robot head. So the Timekeepers are not real, or definitely not what they seem to be. And Loki says the question out loud that we're all supposed to be asking, then who created the TVA? Loki tries to confide in Sylvie about his feelings, but Renslayer hits him with the baton, disintegrating him. Another WTF moment, right?
Yeah, totally floored me. I was like, what?
Yeah, how do you have a show called Loki and now there's no Loki?
Yeah.
I mean, there is a Loki, but it's a female Loki. So Sylvie gets the upper hand with Renslayer and could take the death blow, but instead demands she tell her everything. And of course, with that, we cut to credits. The credits have the song If You Love Me, performed by Patti LaBelle, written by Brenda Lee. And I do want to mention that the lyrics of the song are, if the sun should if the sun should tumble from the skies, if the sea should suddenly run dry, if it seems that everything is lost, I will smile and never count the cost. If you love me, really love me, let it happen, darling, I won't care. So
just to clarify, I think this song is actually performed by Brenda Lee.
Oh, is it?
Yeah, I think
okay,
I think she did the original version, but there are probably several singers who have covered it over the years.
Okay. Well, thanks for the clarification. I think my Shazam or whatever told me Patti LaBelle.
Yeah, I could very well be wrong, but I know when I looked it up, I found the actual song. It had her name attached to it as the singer, so I think that's the case. But if we're wrong, I'm sure someone will tell us.
Yeah, I think it was originally written and sung by Brenda Lee, so I'm just not sure if that's a different version or the. But you listened to it; it was the original version.
Yeah, the one that I found anyway. Yeah.
Okay, fair enough. And of course, there's this mid-credit scene. Before we talk about speculation, because I feel like that last scene just is all the questions I have. We're just going to put in speculation. But so Loki wakes up. He's on his back. He asks, "Is this hell? Am I dead?" By the way, the subtitles spell hell, Hel, which is the Asgardian version of hell, the final resting place of death in the 9 realms. If you don't go to Valhalla, you go to hell, Hel. In the comics, I think like Thor saved Sif from hell, and it might be in the MCU. Oh yeah, he sends Hela to hell. Odin sends Hela to hell, I think. Anyway, so this voice says, "Not yet, but you will be unless you come with us." And we reveal these 3, actually we'll say 4 Loki is looking down at him. There's a black man, there's an older man, there's a little kid, and the little kid has a crocodile, which is also a Loki. And Brad, do you want to tell us more about these Lokis?
Sure. I mean, so the credits actually gave them all names, which is good because it helps us to kind of differentiate, who is who and whatnot. So we have one of them is Kid Loki, who has a big role in Marvel Comics, especially the Agent Loki run that there was, where there's been some inspiration in this show that has come from that, including some of the various Lokis that we've seen. And then we also have the black man who's holding a hammer, which looks like a Loki version of Mjolnir, possibly, is referred to as Boastful Loki. And this character doesn't seem to have a place in Marvel Comics as far as we can tell. So I'm wondering if this is a new creation for the MCU that might be like a combination of Thor and Loki. So
it's like, what if Loki had picked up the hammer instead of Thor?
Yeah, and interestingly enough, there is an issue of Marvel's What If comic that does deal with that, where the exact question is, what if Loki wielded Thor's hammer? And so, funnily enough, that issue of What If is number 47. And the Time Theater that Sylvie gets put in is Time Theater 47. Maybe a link, maybe not. Who knows? And then, so the other one we have is Richard E. Grant as classic Loki. And he's dressed in the original Loki design from the old school Marvel Comics that looks a little bit ridiculous now. Bright yellow, bright green. He's got a cape, huge horns.
It almost looks like a bad cosplay because that's how the costumes looked.
Yeah, it's comparable to the costumes that Wanda and Vision wore in their Halloween episode of WandaVision.
Yeah. By the way, Richard E. Grant obviously has been in many films, including Hudson Hawk, The Player, Bram Stoker's Dracula, The Age of Innocence, Gosford Park, Logan.
With Nail and I.
Yeah, Star Wars, Rise of Skywalker. He was in that. And we should mention that the Kid Loki is it looks exactly like the comics.
Yes, yeah, a perfect rendition of Kid Loki. And he's also holding Crocodile Loki, which has a little horn helmet on.
And I don't think that's in any of the comics, but we have seen a frog Thor, right?
Yeah, there's been a frog Thor, yeah.
So is this like a spider pig kind of thing?
It could be, yeah. I think that's probably the idea there. But yeah.
It's a little ridiculous.
It is a little ridiculous. Yeah.
And also we should mention that they're all standing in an apocalypse, like the aftermath of apocalypse. You see the destroyed Stark Tower behind them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it's not clear if this is meant to be just a destroyed New York City. I'm actually thinking where we are, if we want to go straight into speculation.
Yeah, let's jump into speculation.
This is obviously where people go when they have been hit with that baton. They're not disintegrated from existence or reset. They're sent to this place that feels like some kind of purgatory. And so seeing all these Lokis, I think, feeds into the idea that the Timekeepers, or whoever is behind the Timekeepers, has been trying to maybe get rid of Lokis because they know that they're the ones who are able to create such chaos in the timeline. Or maybe it just so happens that Lokis are the only ones who are mischievous enough to create problems in the timeline so frequently. But since we, obviously saw Mobius get hit with the baton, he's got to be somewhere there too. And with all these buildings and stuff there that are wrecked and destroyed in, disheveled and stuff, I have a feeling that maybe this is where everything goes when it's either A, hit with the baton, or B, affected by the reset grenade.
I like that theory. I agree with that theory. I know some people I saw online were theorizing that maybe B20 or Renslayer is actually not as bad as we think she was, and they've reprogrammed the batons to send them to whatever this other world is instead of killing the people. But I don't think that's the case. I think you're right. I think when you're pruned, you're actually not killed. You're sent to this other multiverse
that's kind of out of time. Yeah.
But it's weird though, because when you look at Hunter B-15 on the tempad, it said that she was deceased. But I mean, I guess they could just be calling anybody that's outside of that timeline.
Yeah, and they also could have just killed her.
Just killed her. Yeah, that's true. Okay, so we've already answered where is Loki. This is like probably some kind of other. You're saying a purgatory. I almost think it's like another multiverse.
It's possible that it could be another branch where they're sending all these people, like a dead timeline maybe, or something like that.
Yeah. How do you think we're going to get to see Mobius again? Like, do you think he's just been sent there because he was also hit with a baton? That seems like the easy.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking, because I feel like I don't think that you can just send Mobius away like that without resolving certain things for his character.
Well, there were some other people that had this theory. I didn't bring it up in previous episodes that actually, I think you might have brought it up. I'm not sure that Renslayer actually had other analysts working for her that were actually other Mobiuses.
Oh, yeah. Yes. I think somebody else had mentioned that.
Yeah. And so that the pen thing from the other favorite analyst was actually from another Mobius, and then there would be another variant Mobius at TVA. And I don't know if that's like easy to explain in the next 2 episodes. They've explained a lot, actually, so I don't know. I think it's probably more likely the pruning sticks just don't kill someone. They send them to this strange storage multiverse timeline, and I'm guessing this is also where Loki's going to become president. This is like all these like misfit Lokis that like kind of like champion him.
Yeah, I don't necessarily know. It might not be only Lokis, because I don't think that if we look at that shot, there are any other Lokis, but probably anybody who is stuck there.
The question is, how do you get out of there? Because he doesn't have a tempad. And this time you don't have Mobius looking for you. Well, we have 2 more episodes to figure that out. So you think all these people are variants that have been hit with the baton, pruned out of existence? That kind of explains everything, I think, to me. I guess the big question, the really big question here is, who is behind the Timekeepers? What is their motivation? Do you think Kang still fits into this? Because if Kang was behind this and he's making this whole facade to have these timekeepers, why would he make the middle timekeeper robot look like him if he didn't want anybody to know he was behind it?
That's a fair question, and I don't have an answer for it. Seeing the timekeepers in that fashion, I think, does kind of shoot some holes in the possibility of Kang being behind it, unless the entire vision of the timekeepers itself is his creation and he doesn't look like that, or looks different. Because honestly, the manifestation of what the timekeeper that would be Kang looks less like Kang than the cartoon version did. So I'm not necessarily sure I buy it as much anymore. But yeah, it's a big question that I'm not entirely sure, because especially now that we've seen that Renslayer seems to think that the timekeepers were real, I'm not sure who is pulling those strings.
Also, who is behind this, and why would they build these 3 very elaborate animatronics with this whole like lighting package and this fog and all the stuff? It's like, a Disney attraction on crack.
Yeah, it's very Wizard of Oz-esque.
Why would they build that for only one person ever to go up there and like, it doesn't seem like many people have ever seen the Timekeepers. So like,
well, I don't necessarily think it's for one person, because like the one thing that we don't know is how long the TVA has been in operation.
Oh yeah.
And when Renslayer, we see her in that flashback, there's an entirely different judge, because she's just a Minuteman still.
What happened to that judge?
Yeah, and how many people are permitted to see the Timekeepers, and so yeah, it's lots of questions.
By the way, I forgot to mention, I don't know how I skipped over it, but when we see the flashback of Sylvie actually getting arrested at the TVA, she sees this man that is kind of like freaking out. Mm-hmm. It's a man with a mustache, and he's someone that's been apprehended by the TVA, a variant. And I just want to point out that same actor is a TVA agent in episode 2 at the end of the episode where they're like monitoring the timeline as it's like collapsing as the reset charges have been sent all over the timeline. He's one of the TVA agents that is working at the TVA. So,
that's pretty cool.
Yeah. Or at least it looks like him a lot. So I'm pretty sure it is. My other thing, every week I do a search for Loki on Twitter just to see what people are saying. And one person was saying this. I just wanted to bring it up to see what your thoughts on this were, Brad. I don't know if this, I don't see how this could play out, but what if Mobius was actually a Loki variant?
That's interesting, but I feel like all of his other traits that are explained by him being a person before he was a TVA agent, such as liking the 90s drinks and being obsessed with jet skis and stuff like that, I think probably blows out of the water.
Yeah. No, I tend to agree with you there. So, okay, so we got 2 episodes left, Brad. How do they escape this place? What is the end of this? How does this all tie together? I feel like I'm not like, I usually at this point in a Marvel thing, I can kind of see the end game. Yeah. And here I don't really see the end game.
Yeah, I don't know either, especially after this episode. It threw so many curveballs our way. And it's tough to see where this is going, especially because like we know it has to end up with the multiverse being spawned and a bunch of different timelines branching out and probably the TVA being destroyed.
Oh, I wanted to ask you about that too.
Yeah.
So at the end of episode 2, she sends all those reset charges all throughout the time, creating all these branching timelines. The TVA is freaking out. We cut to a cliffhanger, and then episode 3 is like this bottle episode. We never got to see what happened to all that. Are we to just assume they fixed it all?
I guess so. I mean, I don't know if it was ever intended to do anything beyond be a distraction, because I'm not necessarily sure what it accomplishes other than just creating chaos for them to follow. I guess
I guess people like us just assumed that it might create the multiverse because we're reading into things of this leading possibly into Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, which is written by the same person. And so it's probably just assumptions on our part, it was just supposed to be a distraction.
Yeah.
Is what I'm saying.
Yeah. But yeah, so I think that will still end up coming to fruition, but I'm just not sure where the series will leave Loki. If it'll leave it in a place where his story can continue outside of the TVA. I don't know. There's so many unknowns that it's just not easy to guess where it's going.
I also wanted to mention I went back to Avengers Campus for the first time since it opened, and I got to meet Variant Loki. And I asked him some questions and stuff, and that video is going to be up on, or actually it's up today on Ordinary Adventures. So if you want to check that out. But it's fun how Marvel, unlike Star Wars with Galaxy's Edge, they're able to change things out week to week. Like they had props from Loki that they have changed out. Like they had, when I was there, they had Loki's daggers in one of the collector's cases, his exhibition cases. And I think the day after I left, they replaced it with the Sylvie's weapon that Renslayer puts on the wall. So I don't know what's there today, but it's just kind of cool that they're, as these shows are airing, they're doing different changes. I also wonder, I haven't looked online or anything. I also wonder, now that Variant Loki has been disintegrated, if he's no longer going to be appearing at Avengers Campus. Maybe I'll answer that next week. But okay, you can find more of all of our work at slashfilm.com. You can find this podcast on Apple, Google, Overcast, Spotify, all the popular podcast apps. Please send your feedback, questions, comments, concerns to us at peter@slashfilm.com. And please, if you enjoyed this podcast, head on over to Apple Podcasts, write a 1 or 2 sentence review, giving us 5 stars. Tell your friends, spread the word. We'll see you tomorrow.